We're talking about birds.
Yeah, let's talk about things that are more fun, like birds, for example.
Okay. Okay. Let me start with a little preamble.
Okay.
So, barn swallows are one of several species of swallows in North America. They are very common here in the United States. And right now, at this point in the United States, there is only one location where they still roost on natural structures. They have become, we call them barn swallows. Obviously, they didn't come with that name. Their scientific name is Hirundo rustica, but we call them barn swallows because humans mostly see them on barns, under eaves, and like under bridges and such, and on such structures. But on the Channel Islands off the coast of California, they actually still make nests on natural structures. That is the only place where they are known at this point to still roost, to still make nests on natural structures.
I did not know that, and that is a remarkable fact. And I was struggling, as you first introduced, I was struggling to predict where that habitat would be. Oh. And I did not get to the right answer, but you having said it, it makes perfect sense. It would be an island.
Yeah. An offshore island close enough such that they didn't have a hard time getting there. But an island that is not permanently inhabited by humans.
Right.
I have actually, we should go to the Channel Islands. We've been saying that for a long time somehow, despite having grown up in Southern California. Have you been?
No.
Yeah. So I've never been either. I don't think you can stay there overnight. I don't think there's anything there. There may be like a ranger kiosk or something, but given that there are lots of barn swallows in neighboring Santa Barbara, Carpinteria or whatever is exactly closest to the Channel Islands, they go there, they maybe find the kiosk and they build nests there, and then they go to the structures that they would normally go to. But otherwise, in the rest of the United States and the rest of North America, they're building on eaves and barns and such.
What I would love to know is, before, I assume it's European structures that have caused them to no longer be found in their original niche. But maybe it's not. Let's say I'd love to know what their ecology was and how common they were before humans were in North America. Because there's if they were capable of living in the wild, the fact that they live very well on the sides of human structures doesn't explain why they're not in the wild anymore.
Right. Right.
So what I'd love to know is what happened. Is it that barn swallows are vastly more common than they once were because actually humans carry with them this element of their niche that's very rare and maybe not found in nature anymore? I will say that there are a number of species, as far as I'm aware, most of them are plants that are no longer found in nature and are only found in certain people's certain cultures' gardens and things like that. But this animal example is interesting.
Yeah, it is. So on May 17th of this year, I began seeing a pair. Barn swallows tend to be pair bonded, which means that they are monogamously, in this case, both. I don't know how they choose the site, but they're building a nest together and brooding the eggs and then feeding the chicks together and then helping them fledge together. A story that we saw from beginning to end from Eve, from inside our house. They positioned a nest where we could see it under one of our eaves from our living room. And it was on May 17th of this year that I first saw this nest being built. So those first 3 videos, Jen, that I sent you, you can show now. And I'm just going to read a tiny bit from this wonderful, wonderful book called Avian Architecture: How Birds Design, Engineer, and Build. And there's a chapter on mud nests, which swallows build several kinds of nests. But you can show the video now while I'm reading this. And so, what you'll see, actually, I will start reading in a minute, but this is one of the parents, and they're pretty monomorphic, meaning it's not easy for non-experts to tell males from females. So I don't know if this is the future father or the future mother, but they come with mud in their mouths, and you could see there's already some mud there, and try to affix it to whatever structure they're trying to build it on. And I'd already been watching for a while, and actually they started on the opposite side of this pole we're looking at. And it just didn't take at all. Like, they spent hours trying to get the beginnings of this nest going, and it wasn't working. So Peter Goodfellow in Avian Architecture in his chapter on mud nests writes, "Not content with a house of straw, the potters of the avian world have evolved to build solid and durable architecture in which mud is the dominant material." Quote, "According to the theory that men acquired their first notions of architecture from birds, we are told that Doxius, the inventor of clay houses, took the hint from swallows. This was recorded in Pliny the Elder's famous Natural History of 77 to 79 Common Era." So a few paragraphs later in the same, you see the second future parent flying in, presumably with mud in its beak, and they did not communicate well, and so they drove each other off.
We've all been there.
But it's beginning to take shape. Okay, you can't really see that yet, but believe me when I tell you that this is going to be the future site of this nest. So, like a potter, the nest builder faces two problems: air trapped between successive loads and mud drying too soon, both of which can cause weaknesses in the structure. To address this, mud builders vibrate their heads when applying a new beakful of mud, which distributes moisture and molds the new load onto and into the drier surface. In order to avoid the collapse of the heavy nest from the wall, birds pause between bouts of building to allow for the mud to dry and harden. This work can be seen in a nest's banded appearance. Once dry, mud is extremely durable and additional plant materials are added for strength. So we watched this nest be built over just a couple of days. I did not record, unfortunately, when it finished, but I think it was just 2 days later. So I think it took 3 days to build between May 17th and May 19th. I know for sure that there were adults hanging out in the nest before our children came home on May 23rd. And presumably here we're guessing, as soon as the nest was built, pretty much, the mother to be was ready. She had been brooding, and she laid eggs that in birds are fertilized right before the laying, which enhances certainty of paternity, which is part of why monogamy is so common in birds. Something like, it's like 90% of birds.
85, I think.
85, okay, yeah. 85% of birds, of which there are 8 species, 11,000. So many more than mammals.
Yes.
Actually, maybe more than 10,000 species of birds. Something like 85% of them are monogamous. And this is facilitated by fathers actually being able to be fairly certain that they are the parents of the offspring that they are raising, unlike, say, in mammals.
Just to complete the logic, if in species where males can't be very sure that they are the parents, then selection does not favor the evolution of monogamy because so many males get cuckolded. So
you have the evolution of strategies like mate guarding,
right?
Like very, very careful guarding, which can take forms that we do not like, but that are understandable from an evolutionary perspective, in which males who are potential future fathers guard their females, women and humans, very carefully to ensure that there is no cheating and that the child that is born 9 months later is in fact theirs.
So I did want to point out in passing, your description, was that Pliny the Elder?
Yes.
In translation, presumably. I don't know if anybody's made this connection, but it's effectively 3D printing, right? This is, I mean,
it's architecture, it's building.
Yeah, but
you can call it the most modern thing, but
yes, but I won't belabor the point, but if you've seen any of these amazing videos of the 3D printing of houses, where the material is basically some form of concrete.
Extruded in place.
Yeah, you've got a big robot arm that knows where it is and comes down and, lays another layer of concrete and builds up a wall. Very, very like this. And a lot of the same considerations, I'm sure, are implied by it, which is, I think it's kind of cool because...
I see the similarity with regard to bridges. So I have seen, I think maybe the one video that I have seen of 3D printed structures is of a bridge. And that's intriguing because you're having to cantilever something out. at least in the case of what I saw. And so you are working against gravity and having to think about not just the materials that you're using, but how they will change over time, as it described in the sections I just read. And as any potter, as I have been in the past, has wrestled with, how does mud change? How does clay change or mud change as it moves from thoroughly wet to thoroughly dry? And in this case, obviously, they're not firing these nests, but they become very durable once dry and hard. And we've got several. We don't clean these off our structure, so we've got several years old barn swallow nests on our house, which have remained quite intact through. And they build them in protected spaces, so they're not facing the windshield of the continent like other parts of the house are, but they are extremely durable despite not having been exposed to any sort of firing as in a kiln.
I'm going to come back a little later to the different kinds of animals, different classes of animals and the different kinds of animals that we've been watching. But I wanted to point out that already in this story, one of the things that I think you and I enjoy about watching these animals that we don't know very much about do things, and, we have a very good toolkit for thinking about animal behavior, but we don't know, we didn't study barn swallows or any other swallows. And so we get to learn from nature, but it also just raises so many questions that you won't know the answer to. Like in this case, you're watching these two animals collecting mud from somewhere. We could probably figure out where, and putting it on the structure in this very particular way. How did they learn to do that? A very strong probability is that most of what they know about how to do it came to them through the egg. That is to say, it's encoded in their genome. Mm-hmm. Because if you're a youngin in a nest, you don't observe the building of that nest. Right. So the most you could do is observe something about the structure you're in, but probably it's too early in their lives for them to even correctly do that.
So just like the multi-generational migration pattern of monarchs, those monarchs can't have learned it. It's impossible. Their great-grandparents are the last ones to have done a particular part of the migration in some cases. So it has to be encoded in the genes.
Has to be encoded in the genes in some ways. But many of you will know that I studied tent-making bats for my dissertation. And the same question is there. The babies that are raised in these tents are not there for the building of them. And then they go on to build them. At least the males do. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, how do they learn the particular structures, which sometimes vary within a species based on the location?
Yep.
Can they infer it by looking at tents made by other bats? In the case of these swallows, can they infer anything by looking at nests that have been properly constructed? And then there's the other question of, and because this is a bird, there's every possibility that there is trial and error, and that they refine the technique by doing exactly what you would do. You try it, it doesn't quite work this way, you happen to get a better result that way, you try to figure out what you did differently, and you build, and so that they become more expert at it, which then, this becomes a part of the storehouse of knowledge that makes a particular barn swallow a good mate. Right, that they've got good nest building technique, they can do it efficiently, they know where to build the nest. That obviously matters a great deal. So anyway, there's all of this stuff about the fact of what they do that we can say raises all kinds of questions about how that could possibly be transmitted from one generation to the next.
Yeah.
Anyway, a fascinating set of questions.
Indeed. So let's show the next video from June 29th. I think it's video 4, which is the nest has long since been built. I remember it began to be built on May 17th and was finished just a couple of days later. The eggs were laid. Now, June 29th, you can't see clearly here, but we had long since counted clearly 5 chicks in the nest. There's 5 chicks in the nest. You can see here the sort of the bands of the nest, the dried grass that has been incorporated into the nest build that is making it stronger.
It's like rebar.
It's like rebar, yeah. And then for a while on the left side of the nest, there were these mature feathers, I think. It's sort of stuck up to the side, behind which one chick often seemed to be trying to show himself. So here they are. Oh, that was the video's over. Now we're looking at it still, waiting for food on June 29th. So they had already begun to be fed by the parents. And let's go to the next
So
video.
hold on.
Okay.
I just want to point out, especially for those who are just listening, they seem to be born with beaks that are
Lipstick.
just absolutely gigantic for their tiny. I mean, at first these animals are barely visible, behind the wall of the nest, and they sort of grow up over it. And at the point that they are visible over the wall, their beaks are still way too big for their heads, which,
Well, for baby birds, these guys are attractive. Baby birds in general are just
ugly. Yeah.
so ugly.
But these guys are good.
But these guys are pretty good, and they've got these like white lipstick beaks. So that was June 29th. They were already being fed by parents. This video doesn't happen to have any of that. But let's check out July 6th. About a week later, they're a week bigger. They're now bulging out of the nest, and you can see that there are 5 here. And you're going to start getting visits from. Boy, I thought there were visits from parents right at the beginning of this video, but hopefully they show up soon. Yeah.
So here, let's just say a few things about what one observes at this point. The visits are very, very. Oh, here we go. So
it looks like 2 got fed in that visit.
One or 2, and then here's a second visit, presumably the other parent, because it was too fast for another feeding run.
Yeah, and if you're counting left to right, 1 through 5, the first visit seemed to have gotten 1 and 2 fed, and the second visit got number 4 fed. And so there does seem to be some variation in who gets fed, and not a ton of jostling, rather of repositioning, it seems. I mean, we can't tell them apart, but one thing that I don't have video of, and I probably wouldn't have shown it anyway, but is that the birds turn around, the chicks turn around in the nest and point their butts out the edge of the nest to poop.
Yep.
And then they turn themselves back around, which once they're this big in a tiny nest is hard, but they work their way in.
Yep. It's a really cool behavior. And I will say, we've had the delightful experience of having nests under a window or near a window twice before this. And once
With 2 different species of birds.
Yeah, once was robins and the other was Stellar's jays.
Yeah.
In the robin's case, how does the problem of the nest filling up with poop get addressed? Well, the babies poop and the parents literally eat it and fly off. So it's a coprophagy system. In this case, they poop over the side and they don't think about it.
Yeah, we think about it.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, we clean it off
that's
regularly.
our stuff. Yes. But anyway, so cool.
Yeah, so that was July 6th. Big birds that at that point, both of us were thinking, like, it's got to be any day now. It's got to be any day. And then on July 10th, I woke up fairly early, although the sun had already been up for a while. It was a little before 6, and looked, and there was only one bird. There was only one bird left in the nest, and it was sort of on the edge of the nest, looking like he was gonna fly. And then I saw 2 on the ground on the deck, and so after not much more transpired, I went and got you, and we proceeded to watch for several hours as the fledging, the initial flights for 4 of the birds from the nest had happened before we had gotten up that morning, but we saw a ton.
Yeah, we saw a ton. Oh, so here you have some video of 2 of the baby birds sitting on the deck. And one of the things, this works differently in different species, but the fledging process where the animals are out of the nest and they really have to...
So that's a parent coming in from the left.
And he's trying to, or he or she's demonstrating something about flight, and the babies presumably know what they have to do at some level. But one of the reasons that we wanted to talk about this is actually the various species that we've been watching. I don't know how to say it other than there are profound philosophical implications. If you take your human expectations of the world and you impose it, or you try to map it onto these parents have been spending the better part of 8 weeks, was it?
Almost 2 months.
So almost 2 months, full time,
Yeah.
creating a structure in which to raise babies, producing 5 babies, feeding those babies till they are all almost equal in size.
Brooding the eggs before they were hatched.
Yeah,
and then
sitting on,
feeding them.
taking turns, sitting on the eggs. I think taking turns sitting on the eggs, but all of that investment and the production of 5 surviving chicks, right? Like, more than twice the mass of the original parents has been, and the offspring are getting 10% of the value of the food or something. So the amount of foraging.
Why do you say that?
No, it's just typical.
Okay.
They're getting 10% that they can incorporate. The return on the food is something like 10%. So you're talking about warm-blooded creatures. You're talking about a huge volume of insects that these parents have collected, and the most amazing aerobatics that are happening. I mean, we watch this too.
Yeah.
The swallows are flying around and nailing insects and flying into the nest, which ain't easy either, right? It's not an easy approach. So all of that investment, and then you get to fledging time. You got 5 essentially full-grown, flight-capable babies, and what do? They drop out of the nest and sit around on the ground trying to figure out how to do the damn thing, right? And so,
did you have some video?
Yeah, we've got some video
from that day.
Yeah, do you want to show some of the? I've forgotten what I sent you, unfortunately, but there's some video.
I think anything that Brett sent you of the swallows will be appropriate.
So here's the one remaining chick sitting in the nest, being fed by the parent. And let's see what else we've got. Oh, so that's the 5. You can only see 4 of them there. But,
there's 5 there, but that's going to be the earlier.
Yeah, that's earlier before fledging. So you don't have to bother with the picture of the. Oh, maybe show the one I sent, the picture I sent of the animal sitting on the deck. There's a picture of 3 animals. That was a good one. So among the questions that all of this raises, how do the parents know who needs to be fed more? How do they prevent competition? The one strongest chick from always being the one to receive it. The parents are presumably keeping track.
Yeah, over the weeks that we could see the chicks in the nest being fed, we kept thinking, okay, there's one guy in the back who's never getting fed. He's just going to die. He's going to get kicked out. There's no way they're taking all 5 of these to fledging. And they did.
Yep. All 5 of them to fledging. And then what happened is very instructive. And I want to just say there is a ironclad piece of logic that helps you reverse engineer the behavior or understand the behavior of any sexually reproducing creature. In sexually reproducing creatures, because populations tend to grow until they reach the state of carrying capacity where the habitat can't support anymore. Any population that's smaller than it could be grows until it isn't smaller. At the point that it's hit carrying capacity, it hovers around that number. And that means...
unless something extrinsic changes.
Right.
And changes the carrying capacity.
The carrying capacity can change and the population can go up or down. But in general, a population tends to be hovering around carrying capacity, which means that the average number of individuals, no matter what kind of creature you're talking about, is an average number of individuals that make it to reproduction from any individual will be 2.
If you're sexually reproducing.
If you are sexually reproducing.
Because your offspring have exactly half of your genome, and you are likely at carrying capacity to replace yourself once. And that once comes in the form of 2 offspring if you are sexually reproducing.
So that means that for animals like this, in a lifetime, which might be several reproductive seasons, they may, this nest, I assume, had more successful fledglings than an average nest. 5 seems like a lot. But anyway, the point is, let's say, the average is 3 and, they get 3 years to do this. Only 2 of those are likely to make it. The rest of them will encounter some fatal obstacle to reproduction. And of
course, these are averages. So you expect that there may be extraordinary swallows who, through luck or selection, end up having more. But that has to exist in tandem with there being unlucky surveys.
Right. So, and this is the key to understanding why evolution is so effective, is that there will be individuals who happen to have all the right stuff. They know where to put the nest, not only for the nest to stick to the wall, but for the babies to have a safe place to fledge, for the babies to be able to figure out how to feed. So there's a lot that goes into what seems like luck, but isn't, and it differs between individuals. So, to the extent that there's stuff to be conveyed by parent to offspring, the ones that are better at knowing what needs to be conveyed and knowing how to convey it, all of these things are advantages. So yes, it won't be that for every pair it will be two. It's that there will be some very successful ones. Most of them will be unsuccessful, but the average is two. And so what we saw here was 5 fledglings, 4 of which we know the immediate fates of, and one of them is a mystery